They are not going anywhere. The colleague who speaks loudest and knows the least. The family member who has been wrong about everything for 30 years and has never once noticed. The person in every meeting who wastes an hour of everyone's time and leaves feeling like a genius. They are not going anywhere. And Schopenhauer knew exactly why. Not because the world is getting dumber. Not because education has failed. But because stupidity, real, weaponized, armored stupidity, is not an absence of intelligence. It is a biological advantage, and the universe rewards it. Once you understand why stupid people exist, not just that they exist, something inside you stops breaking. The frustration becomes clarity. The anger becomes strategy. And you become untouchable. Subscribe. We go this deep every week.
Schopenhauer believed something that most people were too polite to say, that the vast majority of human beings are operating on a fundamentally different level of consciousness than the minority who actually think. He was not being cruel. He was being precise. He described human will, the blind, animal, irrational drive that governs most behavior, as the true master of the human mind. And he observed, with clinical coldness, that most people never escape it. They react, they feel, they defend. They mistake their reactions for thoughts. They mistake their feelings for facts. And they move through the world absolutely certain that they are thinking, when they are merely responding. This is not a moral failure. This is not laziness. This is the default setting of the human animal. And Schopenhauer said, the default was never designed to produce intelligence. It was designed to produce survival.
Here is the mechanism nobody talks about. For 99% of human history, thinking deeply was a liability. The animal that stopped to analyze whether the predator was actually dangerous got eaten. The animal that ran immediately, without thinking, survived. Fast, emotional, reactive processing won every time. The brain that thinks slowly, carefully, and from multiple angles, the brain that questions its own assumptions, that brain was a genetic luxury that most environments could not afford. So evolution optimized for speed, for certainty, for the immediate emotional response that could be acted on without delay. It optimized very efficiently for exactly the kind of mind that drives you insane every single day. Schopenhauer saw this clearly. He did not rage against it. He studied it, the way a scientist studies a law of physics. Not a problem to be solved, a force to be understood.
Now, the part that makes this genuinely terrifying. Stupidity does not know it is stupid. This is not a clever observation. It is a structural feature of how limited cognition works. To recognize a gap in your knowledge, you need enough knowledge to see where the gap is. The person who has never read a book on history does not feel the absence of that knowledge. They feel complete. They feel informed. They feel confident in their historical opinions because they have no framework that would allow them to see how wrong they are. Psychologists documented this as the Dunning-Kruger effect. But Schopenhauer identified the mechanism 200 years earlier. He wrote that the fool's greatest protection
is his inability to measure the distance between what he knows and what there is to know. He lives in a closed room, and because he cannot see the walls, he believes the room is infinite. And here is the consequence that destroys intelligent people who do not understand this. The fool's confidence is not performance, it is genuine. And genuine confidence is magnetic. The world follows the person who seems certain, not the person who is actually right.
This is where it gets uncomfortable. Stupid people in the social arena almost always win. Not because they are right, not because they are respected, but because they are willing to do what intelligent people refuse to do. They repeat themselves endlessly. They escalate emotionally without limit. They use social pressure as a weapon. They never back down. They never feel embarrassed by being wrong. Because they do not experience being wrong the way you do. For you, being wrong is a signal to update your understanding. For them, being wrong is simply an attack to be defended against. And intelligent people, who feel embarrassment acutely, who update when presented with evidence, who back down when the logic fails. Look, in social terms, like they are losing. Schopenhauer called this the tyranny of the majority. Societies do not naturally organize around intelligence. They organize around social dominance. And social dominance has always been the territory of the loudest, the most persistent, and the least self-aware. Now, the mistake. The mistake that every intelligent person makes at least once, and some make for their entire lives. The belief that stupid people can be fixed. That if you explain clearly enough, if you find the right words, if you are patient enough, if you provide the right evidence, the person in front of you will update, will think, will grow. Schopenhauer spent years in this trap himself. He submitted his masterwork, expecting the academic world to recognize its genius. They ignored it. He competed for lecture audiences against Hegel, who he considered a fraud and a fool, and watched his own classroom empty while Hegel's overflowed. The lesson he drew from this was not that he was wrong. The lesson was that he had fundamentally misunderstood the relationship between truth and audience. Truth does not automatically attract attention. Spectacle does. Emotion does. Confidence does. The crowd follows what feels right, not what is right. And the person who does not understand this, who keeps offering truth to an audience that was never asking for it, will spend their entire life confused about why they keep losing. So what did Schopenhauer actually do? How did the man who understood stupidity better than anyone actually live with it? 3 things. First, he stopped trying to educate people who had not asked to be educated. This sounds obvious. It is almost impossible to actually do, because the intelligent person's deepest drive, deeper than the drive for success, deeper than the drive for recognition, is the drive to be understood. Schopenhauer eventually understood that this drive, this desperate need to be seen and recognized by minds that are simply not equipped to see you, was his own weakness, not theirs. Second, he redirected his energy away from the crowd.
and toward his own work. He walked the same streets in Frankfurt every day for decades. He read, he wrote, he thought. Not as a retreat from the world, as a deliberate investment in the only mind he could actually improve. His own. Third, and this is the most misunderstood part, he maintained strategic distance. Not hatred, not contempt, not the bitter isolation of someone who has given up. Strategic distance. The deliberate, conscious decision to limit exposure to environments that drain intelligence, the way you limit exposure to toxic substances. He wrote, and this cuts deep, a man of high intellect who is forced to spend time with mediocre minds will inevitably feel the drag, the slow lowering of his own standard, unless he maintains an internal separation that no social pressure can breach. This is not arrogance. This is cognitive hygiene. Your thinking is shaped by the conversations you have, the arguments you engage in, the level of thought you are asked to respond to daily. Spend enough time arguing about trivialities, and your mind becomes trivial. This is not a metaphor. This is how neuroplasticity actually works.
Here is the part that makes this urgent. Stupidity is contagious. Not metaphorically, neurologically. When you are forced to engage with irrational thinking, to predict it, navigate it, respond to it, your brain begins to model it. It builds internal representations of how that mind works. And the more time you spend inside that model, the more your own thinking starts to adopt its patterns. Researchers call this cognitive contamination. Schopenhauer called it being dragged into the mud. He observed that even genuinely brilliant people, after years of trying to reason with the unreasonable, begin to show the same reactivity, the same defensiveness, the same emotional thinking they were fighting against. You do not have to become stupid to be damaged by stupidity. You just have to spend enough time fighting it on its own terrain. The ring is the trap, not the opponent. Here is the part that makes this urgent. Stupidity is contagious. Not metaphorically, neurologically. When you are forced to engage with irrational thinking, to predict it, navigate it, respond to it, your brain begins to model it. It builds internal representations of how that mind works. And the more time you spend inside that model, the more your own thinking starts to adopt its patterns. Researchers call this cognitive contamination. Schopenhauer called it being dragged into the mud. He observed that even genuinely brilliant people, after years of trying to reason with the unreasonable, begin to show the same reactivity, the same defensiveness, the same emotional thinking they were fighting against. You do not have to become stupid to be damaged by stupidity. You just have to spend enough time fighting it on its own terrain. The ring is the trap, not the opponent.
So, what do you actually do? Not with the individual fool in front of you, with the system, with the fact that stupid people will always outnumber you, will always be louder, will always be more confident, will always win the popularity contest. Schopenhauer's answer was elegant in its ruthlessness. Stop competing in their game. The fool competes for approval, for dominance in the room, for the last word, for the feeling of having won. The intelligent person who competes in that game, even when they win, loses, because they spent their energy on a game that produces nothing of value. The alternative is to define a different game, one where the metrics are not social approval, but output, not recognition, but quality of thought, not winning arguments, but building things. The most powerful thing you can do in a world dominated by stupidity is to quietly, relentlessly, without seeking permission, produce work that outlasts everyone in the room.
Schopenhauer's books were ignored for decades. The people who ignored them, the critics, the academics, the crowded lecture halls of Hegel, are remembered by almost no one. Schopenhauer's work, the work he produced in isolation, without approval, without an audience, influenced Nietzsche, influenced Freud, influenced Einstein, influenced Tolstoy, influenced the entire shape of modern thought. He did not win the argument in his lifetime. He won the century. That is what happens when you stop playing for the room and start playing for history. You are not going to change the ratio. Stupid people will always outnumber you. They will always be louder. They will always seem more confident. None of that matters if you understand what game you are actually playing. The goal is not to be understood by everyone. The goal is to be understood, eventually, by the right people, through work that cannot be ignored, no matter how long it takes. Schopenhauer waited. His work didn't.
You clicked on this video because something in you recognized the question. Why do stupid people exist? Why are there so many of them? Why does the world seem to reward them? Why does your clarity feel like a burden instead of an advantage? Schopenhauer's answer, stripped of everything else, is this. They exist because nature needed them. They are not failures of evolution. They are its most successful product. And understanding that, truly, viscerally understanding that, removes the last piece of power they had over you. You stop being angry. You stop being exhausted. You stop explaining yourself to people who were never going to understand. And in that space, the space where the argument used to be, you build something. Something that lasts. Something they cannot touch. Because the truly stupid thing, the only truly stupid thing, is to spend your intelligence fighting a battle that was never yours to fight. If this hit different, subscribe. Leave a comment with the person who drains you most. Not their